Beyond the stereotype, embracing your Black womanhood and reclaiming your beauty. A journey of pain, struggle, and self-acceptance. I remember the first time I became aware of my Blackness in a way that felt heavy, suffocating even. I was 9 years old. My mom had sent me to a new school, a predominantly white school, in a neighborhood she believed would offer me more opportunities. It was supposed to be the better life she had always dreamed of for me, away from the chaos of our old neighborhood. But instead it became the place where I learned to doubt myself, to shrink into a version of myself that didn't seem too loud, too dark, too different. I remember that first day vividly. My hair was neatly braided by my mom, adorned with pink and purple beads at the ends. I had always loved those beads. They were a symbol of home. Of the weekends I spent sitting between my mother's legs as she carefully parted my hair and told me stories about her own childhood. But when I walked into that classroom, my love for those beads quickly turned into shame. The other girls giggled, whispering behind their hands. Some of the boys pointed and asked if they could touch them. One girl, blonde and blue-eyed, looked at me with a mix of curiosity and disdain and said, "Why does your hair make noise?" I was too young to understand what was happening, but I felt the shift inside me. I began to see myself through their eyes. Eyes that questioned my beauty, my worth, my very existence. It was the first time I felt different, and not in a good way. As the years went on, the comments became more pointed. "Why do your lips look like that? How come your skin is so dark? You'd be pretty if you weren't so black." These words came not just from classmates, but sometimes even from teachers. I remember one teacher pulling me aside after class to tell me I should consider straightening my hair because it would make me look more presentable. Presentable to whom? I wondered, but I was too young to ask those kinds of questions, too afraid of being even more ostracized. So I started to conform. At 13, I convinced my mom to buy me a relaxer, telling her it was because I wanted to fit in. She resisted at first, explaining how much she loved my natural curls, how they reminded her of our family's heritage and strength. But I wasn't hearing any of that. All I knew was that my hair was a source of pain, and I wanted that pain to end. So one Saturday morning, we went to the beauty supply store, bought the creamy crack, and sat in the kitchen as she smoothed it through my curls. I could smell the chemicals burning through the strands, feel the tingle on my scalp as it straightened out the kinks. When she rinsed it out and blew it dry, I barely recognized myself. My hair was straight, flat, motionless, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I had succeeded in erasing part of myself that wasn't acceptable. But it didn't last. The relaxer didn't erase my Blackness. It didn't make me fit in. The boys still made jokes about my lips and my skin. The girls still whispered behind my back. I started to internalize those whispers, letting them seep into my bones until they became my truth. I hated myself, my hair, my skin, my features. I remember standing in front of the mirror for hours, pulling at my nose, wishing it were thinner, lighter, more like theirs. I prayed for lighter skin, for hair that would swing and move like theirs did. I began to loathe everything that made me me. By the time I was 16, I had mastered the art of camouflage. I wore my hair in sleek ponytails, never allowing it to puff out in its natural state. I avoided the sun as much as possible, afraid that it would make me even darker. I spent hours applying makeup, trying to minimize the fullness of my lips, contouring my nose to make it look smaller. But no matter what I did, I never felt beautiful. No matter how much I tried to erase myself, I could still feel the weight of my Blackness pressing down on me, reminding me that I would never be enough in a world that wasn't built for girls who looked like me. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where I could reinvent myself. I moved to a city far away from home, hoping that distance would allow me to escape the pain of my past. But college only amplified the insecurities I had buried so deeply. The university I attended was even less diverse than my high school. I was often the only Black woman in my classes, sometimes even on campus, and while no one said anything overtly racist, I could feel the stares. I could feel the eyes following me as I walked to class, sat in the cafeteria, or studied in the library. It wasn't just the stares. It was the subtle ways people would talk over me, dismiss my ideas, or make jokes about my urban style. It was the white girls who would tell me I was pretty for a black girl, or ask if they could touch my hair when I finally stopped relaxing it and let it grow out. It was the boys who would flirt with me in private, but never acknowledge me in public, because I wasn't the kind of girl they wanted to be seen with. I tried dating, but it was a minefield. I would get messages from men who fetishized my blackness, treating me like some kind of exotic trophy. Others would avoid me altogether, clearly uninterested in dating someone who didn't fit their narrow standard of beauty. I started to believe that I wasn't worthy of love, that no one would ever truly see me as beautiful. And the worst part was, I had begun to believe it too. It wasn't until my mid-20s that things began to shift. I wish I could say it was an overnight transformation, that I woke up one morning and suddenly loved everything about myself. But that's not how healing works. It was slow, painful, and full of setbacks. The turning point came when I attended a natural hair workshop, hosted by a local black women's group. I was hesitant to go at first. I hadn't been around that many black women in a long time, and I was still carrying the shame I had internalized for so many years. But something in me told me to go, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, I was surrounded by women who looked like me. Women who wore their hair proudly in curls, braids, and twists. Women who celebrated their melanin, who wore bold lip colors that made their full lips pop, who walked with a confidence I had never seen in myself. I sat in that room, watching these women talk about their journeys to self-acceptance, their struggles with the same insecurities I had carried for so long, and for the first time I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one who had been told I wasn't enough. I wasn't the only one who had tried to shrink herself to fit into a mold that was never meant for her. I listened to their stories of resilience, of reclaiming their beauty on their own terms, and something in me began to shift. Over the next few months, I started to unlearn the lies I had been fed my whole life. I threw out the relaxers, the skin lightening creams, and the endless supply of contour kits. I let my hair grow out in its natural state, learning to love the way it curled and coiled. I started wearing clothes that made me feel good, not because they fit into someone else's idea of beauty, but because they made me feel powerful. I began to surround myself with people who saw me, really saw me, and loved me for who I was. But it wasn't just about changing my appearance. It was about reclaiming my identity, my blackness, my womanhood. I started reading books by black women authors, watching films that centered our stories, and seeking out spaces where I could be in community with other black women. I began to see the beauty in my full lips, my wide nose, my dark skin. I started to love the parts of myself that I had spent so long trying to hide. And in doing so, I began to heal. There are still days when the old insecurities creep back in, when I hear those voices from my childhood telling me I'm not enough. But now I know those voices are lies. I know that my beauty is not defined by anyone else's standards. I know that I am worthy of love, of joy, of everything this world has to offer. Embracing my black womanhood has been the hardest and most beautiful journey of my life. It has been a process of shedding the weight of stereotypes and reclaiming the parts of myself that were always meant to shine. I am no longer afraid to take up space, to be loud, to be seen. I am no longer afraid to be me. This journey isn't over, it's ongoing. But for the first time, I can look in the mirror and love the woman staring back at me. Not despite her blackness, but because of it. And that, more than anything, is what freedom feels like. The healing process wasn't easy, and if I'm honest, there were many moments when I wasn't sure if I'd ever truly feel comfortable in my own skin. The epiphany I had at the natural hair workshop was only the beginning. It was a spark, but like all sparks, it needed fuel to keep the fire burning. That's when I realized that I couldn't do this alone. I needed guidance, tools, and a deeper understanding of how to unlearn the toxic ideas that had been instilled in me for years. Therapy became my lifeline. I had always been hesitant about seeking professional help. There's this stigma in the black community, especially among black women, that seeking therapy means you're weak, or worse, broken beyond repair. But after years of battling self-doubt and self-hate, I was ready to do whatever it took to heal. My therapist, a Black woman herself, was one of the first people who truly saw me not as a project to fix, but as a person with layers, complexities, and pain that deserved attention. Through our sessions, I started to unpack the weight of the stereotypes that had been forced on me. We talked about how society, through media, culture, and even within our communities, had shaped my beliefs about what it meant to be beautiful. We examined how those beliefs had influenced my behavior, my relationships, and my view of self-worth. It was difficult work. Some days, I left those sessions feeling raw and exposed, like old wounds had been reopened, but other days, I felt lighter, more in control of the narrative I was writing for myself. In therapy, I learned about mindfulness and self-compassion, two practices that, at the time, seemed foreign to me. The idea that I could be kind to myself, that I could actively choose to love and affirm myself, felt radical. I had spent so long seeking validation from others that I had forgotten the power of my own voice. My therapist encouraged me to speak kindly to myself, to look in the mirror, and affirm my beauty, my worth, my strength. It felt awkward at first, even uncomfortable, but slowly, over time, those affirmations began to sink in. Alongside therapy, I sought out communities that celebrated Black womanhood. I joined online forums, attended local meetups, and connected with women who were on similar journeys of self-love and acceptance. These spaces became sanctuaries for me, places where I didn't have to explain my Blackness, where I didn't have to justify why I wore my hair the way I did, or why I embraced my full lips and wide nose. The women in these communities showed me that there was more than one way to be beautiful, more than one way to be a Black woman. They encouraged me to experiment with my style, to try bold lip colors, to adorn my hair with scarves and beads that reflected my culture. I felt free to explore myself in ways I hadn't before. But as helpful as therapy and community were, the journey was still full of challenges. I had to face the deeply ingrained voices that still whispered in the back of my mind, telling me that I wasn't enough. It wasn't a linear path. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when I slipped back into old habits of comparison. I had to learn patience with myself, to recognize that healing isn't about perfection, it's about progress. One of the most transformative tools I discovered during this time was journaling. Writing became an outlet for me to process my thoughts and emotions in a way that felt safe and non-judgmental. I wrote letters to my younger self, the little girl who sat in that classroom feeling alienated and ashamed of her hair. I apologized to her, not for what she had endured, because none of that was her fault, but for the way I had neglected her pain for so long. I promised her that I would do better, that I would honor her story and her beauty. Through journaling, I also began to visualize the woman I wanted to become, someone who walked with confidence, who embraced her Blackness in all its forms, and who no longer sought validation from a world that didn't see her. I wrote about the kind of love I wanted to receive, not just from others but from myself. I began to set goals for how I would continue to care for myself, both physically and emotionally. I made commitments to nourish my body with good food, to exercise, not as a means of punishment but as a form of self-care. And most importantly, I made a vow to never again try to change myself to fit someone else's definition of beauty. As my self-perception began to shift, so did my relationships. I started surrounding myself with people who uplifted me, who saw my beauty and potential, even on the days when I couldn't. I distanced myself from toxic relationships that fed into my insecurities. This wasn't always easy. There were friends I had to let go of, people who couldn't understand the journey I was on, but I learned that sometimes, letting go is necessary for growth. Despite all these changes, it wasn't until I found the book Beyond the Stereotype, Embracing Your Black Womanhood and Reclaiming Your Beauty, that my transformation truly took root. I came across the book in a small, Black-owned bookstore one afternoon, and something about the title called to me.